Hey guys, Mike in the Woods here. Keeping in line with my seasonal focus of winter backpacking, I thought I'd take a look at how it contrasts with your regular, everyday, run-of-the-mill summertime backpacking. And if you're anything like I was back when I first thought about doing this, you kind of think the whole idea of camping out here in sub-zero temperatures is kind of nuts. And, well, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't more challenging. But I think if you respect Mother Nature and keep these 7 very important differences in mind, I think it'll be relatively easy to slip into things. But let's take a look at what those are. First one is gear is heavier and bulkier. It goes without saying, but winter is cold. To stay warm, the amount of gear you need is much more than summer, or even 3-season backpacking for that matter. You need more clothes because you can't get away with shorts and a t-shirt in winter. You need pants, a sweater, base layers, and storing your additional layers in your pack all amount to quite a lot of bulk. My personal setup is a fleece jacket, followed by my Walmart puffy jacket, and then my thicker winter coat over top of that. And depending on the time of day and how much temperatures can fluctuate on a given day, I could be down to just that fleece layer with everything else having to be stuffed in my pack, so make sure you leave extra room for all the extra layers you have to shed. And the big obvious hit to weight and bulk is your sleeping bag setup. Just to get to an absolute minimum of minus 20 degrees Celsius, my setup consists of a big sleeping bag that barely fits in the lower compartment of my Osprey pack, a heavy-duty wool blanket, and an inner fleece liner. That takes up more than half of the volume of my pack. If I want to go even colder than that, I do have a minus 30 degrees Celsius sleeping bag from Browning for the really cold stuff. It weighs 12 pounds and is the size of a beer keg in the stuff sack, so there's no way I could fit that in my backpack. At that point, I switched to hauling stuff on my sled, something you might want to consider if you don't think all of your stuff will fit into a backpack. Number 2, staying warm and dry is more important. With summer backpacking, or heck, even in 3-season backpacking, you can get away with getting wet and damp with things like water crossings and rain and still be okay. Not so much in winter. Getting wet is a very dangerous thing in winter conditions. It's a good way to get hypothermic really quickly. And it's not just from the obvious, like from the snow that's everywhere or sinking through ice to get soaked, but even your sweat can be dangerous. You need to adjust layers as needed to stay warm, but avoid getting to the point of being sweaty as much as possible. As you come in and out of the wind and the sun, stop and start, don't be surprised if you are constantly adjusting layers to stay in the comfort zone, and that's completely normal and something you should bake into your expectations of time spent. Like I mentioned, my setup for an extreme low of minus 20 degrees Celsius is a long sleeve base layer under a fleece jacket, then my Walmart puffy jacket, and then a thicker coat, which get added and removed as needed. And for the even colder stuff, I have an additional thick winter coat that goes on top of all of that. In the worst case scenario where you do get wet, know ahead of time what your game plan is to deal with that. Generally, it's some form of immediately changing to dry clothes and getting a fire going as soon as humanly possible. And don't underestimate how long it takes to dry out wet clothes and boots over the fire. It's way more than you think. Number 3, there's far less hours in the day. Wintertime, where you eat breakfast in the dark and eat dinner in the dark. Generally, in the wintertime, you get less hours of daylight than the summer by a significant margin. Here in southern Ontario, right around winter solstice, it gets dark at around 4:30 to 5 o'clock p.m. This translates to less time on the trail to make distance before it gets dark, unless you're comfortable hiking in the pitch black. Factor this into how far you expect to hike on a given day. It also means that once you do get to camp and set it up, you're going to have to be sitting around in the dark for quite a few hours before you finally hit the sack. In the summer, you might get away without having to use your headlamp much at all, but in winter, you'll wind up chewing through quite a lot of battery with your headlamp. Not only because it's darker for longer, but also because it's so cold, your batteries won't be as efficient. Number 4, a hammock might be better. In the summer, most people opt for a tent for obvious reasons. Bugs, mosquitoes, black flies, deer flies, ticks, spiders, and any other creepy crawlies that might want to make you their lunch. But in the winter, you don't really have those bugs to worry about much at all. Maybe spiders or something, but generally they leave you alone, so sleeping open air is perfectly fine. I've slept cowboy style quite a few times, namely when I was too exhausted getting to camp to properly set up my shelter, so I just slept on the ground by the fire for the entire duration of our backcountry trip. What is a problem in winter though is snow. Pesky, aggravating snow. If you use a tent in winter, I guarantee it'll still find its way in there somehow. You have to clear out a spot of the snow for your tent to sit in the first place, or maybe you can't really stake down your tent because there's no snow and the ground is completely frozen solid. By using a hammock, you escape this problem entirely, elevating you well off the ground and out of the snow, but even if you have to stake down a tarp, it's much easier to figure out how to peg down 4 corners of a tarp instead of 8 or more for a tent. You still do want to be prepared for a ground sleep situation though, just in case your hammock fails, ask me how I know, or if you don't have any sturdy trees around, so a good tarp or plastic sheet to use as a ground sheet would be a good inclusion in your kit. Personally, I bring a 10x10 tarp and my hammock for winter trips with a blue tarp I use to wrap around my bedroll to protect against the elements, which doubles as my ground sheet. Number 5, managing your drinking water is difficult. On one hand, your water source in winter can be literally everywhere in the form of snow, but on the other hand, you can be in a situation where there's no snowfall at all, and the streams and lakes are completely frozen over. This is definitely something you want to solve before you head out on your trip, because you need to know if you can just scoop up snow wherever needed, or if you need to bring an axe to hack through the frozen ice to get at the water underneath. And, as you might expect, it's winter, water freezes. In the summer, you can just keep your clean drinking water ready to go in bottles for whenever you need, but in winter, your water in the water bottles will freeze if you leave it in the bottle for too long. And this is why a lot of winter campers will bring metal water bottles, so it can just remelt it in the fire as needed. But if you do only have plastic bottles, you have to be very attentive to water management to make sure it doesn't freeze. Generally, you want to avoid having large reserves like you would in the summer, so you can cycle it out of your bottle faster and reduce the risk of it being exposed to the cold long enough to freeze. You can keep the bottles up against your body and in your sleeping bag to keep them just above the freezing point. And treating water to make it drinkable in the first place is another point of pain, as traditional backpacking water filters like the Katadyn or the Sawyer aren't much good in sub-zero conditions. If water freezes in the filters, it'll break the microscopic filaments and compromise the filter. If you've had water freeze in your filter, don't trust it, consider it unusable just to be safe. Instead, the go-to method for water treatment in winter is to boil it. I carry a 3-liter titanium cookpot for this exact reason, so I can treat almost 3 liters of water at once if I need to, while it also doubles as my cooking pot. And don't assume that you need to wait for your water to cool down before you can use it to hydrate either. A great way to make use of your freshly boiled water is to make teas, hot chocolates, coffees, and any other hot beverages, obviously making sure to not overdo it with caffeine or sugar. Not only does it hydrate you, but it also warms you up. Number 6, the terrain is tougher. Snow and ice are your biggest annoyances when hiking in winter, whether it's soft and powdery, making you sift and sink all over the place, or the hard and crusty refrozen variety that makes you endlessly post-hole. Snow will slow you down considerably, and ice will be a constant slipping hazard. If snow is going to be a concern, there's a reason people use snowshoes. It spreads the load of your body weight over a larger area, preventing you from sinking into the snow. You want snowshoes that are appropriate to your weight. If you're a heavy dude like me, you want the biggest ones you can get, as the more surface area you spread your weight over, the less you'll sink into the snow every step. This is also another reason why people go with sleds for hauling their gear in winter. It unloads weight off of them, so they're lighter on top of the snow, and into the sled, which has a huge surface area for sailing over the powdery white stuff. As you might imagine, this will slow you down considerably, and when you combine this with less hours in the day, you could probably guess that. Number 7, you'll do far less distance in a day. Between the impact of snow and ice slowing you down, heavier gear, and a lot less hours of daylight, you can pretty much be sure that your daily distance will be significantly less than what you do on a summer trip. I would say figure your daily distance at anywhere from 1/3 to 1/4 of what you think you'd be able to do in the summertime. If you think you'd be able to do 30 kilometers a day in the summer, expect to do maybe 7 to 10 in the winter. Obviously, this can vary drastically based on what the conditions are like. If there's no snow or ice, you might be much closer to your summer distance, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Snow could blow in the middle of your trip and completely transform your hiking experience. There's also the other time consumption factors as well, boiling water instead of filtering, adjusting layers constantly. You get the picture. Plus, it never hurts to intentionally slow things down anyways. If it's your first winter trip, pushing yourself to your max capacity probably isn't a wise idea. Slow down, aim for lower daily distances than what you think you can accomplish, and see how it goes. That was definitely one of my own takeaways back when I first started. So, that's my 7 biggest differences that I think winter backpacking has over summer. It's definitely a different ballgame, but not so intimidating if you ease yourself into it. After all, if my lame ass can do it, it can't be that bad, right? If you're new to the channel, I combine fun, futuristic technology with traditional outdoors experiences. Check out my other videos and consider subscribing if that's your thing. I have some Amazon affiliate links in the description for winter gear that I personally use if you're curious. That's all for me, guys. I'll catch you next video.